The PowerPoint, not my notes.
Yes.
Okay, the PowerPoint. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. And thank you, Autism Community Star, for hosting us. Tonight, we're going to be talking about how to, I need to change the way, there we go. We're going to hopefully present some information that has been really desired by the community and will provide you information and help you navigate the pathway towards your child's success. So this presentation will provide information about the transition from EI services, and we'll also introduce you to the children's programs. We'll share eligibility requirements and review the process for intake and enrollment. So for some background information for those of you who may not know about Rocky Mountain Human Services, we are a nonprofit organization that empowers people with the resources they need to thrive and to live the lives they envision in their communities of choice. RMHS serves Colorado residents with specific needs, including children and adults with delays and disabilities. Additionally, we provide services to veterans who are experiencing homelessness or are in jeopardy of losing their home, and adults and children in need of long-term care due to significant health concerns. Today, our focus will be on the early intervention transition and the children's programs at RMHS. At RMHS, we embrace the power of community to support individuals and families in creating their future. We do this by simplifying access, celebrating individuality, and bridging communities. So to start, we want to provide you with a visual that shows the pathway to success for children and youth at RMHS. So as you can see, early intervention is the on-ramp, and active service coordination is the exit or the bridge to adult services at age 18. From ages 3 to 17, children and youth can receive case management services from our children's programs. So we're going to start from the beginning, and Shannon's going to take over and focus on the transition from early intervention and help walk you through and give you some tips so that the transition to family support is successful.
Thank you, Julianne. Hi, everyone. My name is Shannon Banks, and I am the Early Intervention Engagement Specialist at Rocky Mountain Human Services. So I do a lot of work connecting with families in the community and also a wonderful organization such as the Autism Community Store to share information about our program and then also help navigate some of the processes and the transition that happens with early intervention. Early intervention provides services for children that are birth to 3 years old. So like Julianne said, kind of the on-ramp into the world of additional support and therapeutic services for children. And as with any transition, it seems like it comes really, really fast. And especially when we're looking at early intervention, we have a brief time with children and families because 3 years old comes very quickly when you are working with our program. And so we actually say that the transition process starts at 2 years old. So as soon as a child that's in our program, turns 2, we really want families and caregivers to start planning. Even though there hasn't been any official transition conversations at this point, that 2 years old is really a time that families can start to think, what do we want and need to happen in the next year? So when that really quick 3rd birthday comes, we are set up and we know what our next steps are going to be to continue supporting our child and family. And so at 2 years old, we really want families to start planning and thinking about transition. At 2 years and 3 months is when that official transition would start within the early intervention program. At 2 years and 3 months, your service coordinator and your early intervention team will start to have conversations with you and your family to kind of get a feel of what you're looking for and needing, and mainly how your child is progressing. And if there are still concerns about their development that may require some in-school support with preschool special education services. So that conversation is around, could my child be eligible for special education services? Am I interested in pursuing the public school system for that? And if so, do I give permission to my EI team to go ahead and share information with my public school district to get that process started? So in addition to making some of those decisions about preschool, you're also going to be trying to gather information and explore other options when it comes to transition. So the big question at that 2 years and 3 month mark would be about preschool, but then also as a family and caregiver, kind of thinking through what other information do I need access to? What are some other things I want to explore so that we have our plan set up? Between 2.5 and 2 years and 9 months, you'll have your official transition conference within EI. And so if you are pursuing preschool special education services, this is when that gets handed off to your public school district. So at that transition conference, that school team would work on gathering additional information so that they're able to schedule an evaluation that would then determine your child's eligibility to receive special education services. Not only is that transition conference that handoff to our public school districts, but it's also a time to work with your service coordinator and EI team to officially document what our plan for transition is and what those next steps are going to be. So that's why at 2 years and 3 months, we say it's really important to start exploring some of those other options and really gather some information. So when you get to the transition conference, you and your team can be very clear on what next steps need to be taken and what's going to happen in the next 3 to 6 months before 3 years old to make sure everything that we want is in place. So at that third birthday, when early intervention services end, that next programming option will pick up, or things have been put in place so that you and your child have a successful transition out of what early intervention was looking like and providing for your family. Julianne, we can go to the next slide. So what I wanted to go over in addition to the actual official process of transition was kind of the roles of our main team members in that transition process. In early intervention, every family has a service coordinator, and your service coordinator serves as your guide through that transition process. They're going to coordinate those meetings within timelines that are required. Like I mentioned, those kind of wonky 2 years and 3 months, 2 years and 6 months. Your service coordinator is going to be the one that's on top of that to make sure that the planning for transition is moving along. If you are pursuing preschool special education services and you've given your permission, your service coordinator will provide your child's info to the school district to get that handoff process going. They can also and will provide resources and information that you may be looking for and answering some of your questions about what I'm really interested in continuing with some like social options for my child. What does that look like after 3? Your service coordinator will be able to provide information and resources on that. And if you guys are at Rocky Mountain Human Services, your service coordinator would be the one that would submit any internal referrals for programming after 3 that Julianne will talk about later in our presentation. A big player in that transition process is also the school district. So for our families at Rocky Mountain, that is Denver Public Schools. And so the school district would be the one that's in charge of scheduling that eligibility evaluation to see if special education services would be an option for your child. They also determine the eligibility, and then they would write that school-based plan, which is called an IEP, so that services could be provided at school starting on that 3rd birthday. And the school district also completes the preschool placement for children who are coming out of early intervention and will be going to preschool, receiving special education services or not. And I also wanted to highlight the role of the family and the caregivers in this process. You all are an invaluable and very important member of the team, as within any planning that goes on in early intervention. We're really looking for our families to communicate your wants and needs for when early intervention services end, so that we're meeting those needs and really planning to best suit you and your child. We really want you to ask questions about the options and what information and resources are available to meet your identified needs. Families are also able to set up visits or tours with different schools that they might be choosing to pursue for either their preschool placement through their public school system, or if they're looking for a private programming option. And then families will be working closely with their early intervention team to make any funding requests prior to aging out of early intervention. Next slide, please, Julianne. And here are just some guiding questions to help families in some of the major categories when thinking about transition. The first thing that the families that we need to think about is kind of schooling and daycare placement. So really asking, would you like your child to go to public school, or are you more interested in a private daycare or preschool program? Or would you like your child to stay at home with family or in a different caregiving situation? Asking if your child is still showing some delays, if you guys are still encountering some difficulties or challenges, and if the EI team thinks that they may or may not qualify for special education services. Even though therapy through early intervention ends at the age of 3, it doesn't mean that in-home therapy has to stop. So thinking through, like, does my child still have needs that require some continued therapy, even outside of a school-based plan? And are you interested in more in-home therapy that might be similar to early intervention, or are you interested in a center or clinic-based therapy option? And a big one here too, because therapy is no longer offered through early intervention, is finding out, what does your insurance plan cover? That'll be really important in determining continued therapy and what that looks like for your child. The third area to think through, especially if you are receiving early intervention services at Rocky Mountain Human Services, would be about funding. If you and your family have accessed funding while in early intervention, what funding did you access? And will you have these same needs after your child turns 3? Do you have any immediate needs for that transition period and for your child to successfully navigate what things look like after 3? And then, are there specific supports or services that your child will need to successfully transition, maybe before a new programming support option comes up? So really thinking through what you might need in that time from getting ready to turn 3 to that 3rd birthday and moving on. Next slide, please, Julianne. And then this slide is just a few resources that I wanted to let you guys know about. Early Intervention Colorado sets the timeline for transition, and they have some great information on their website that includes a planning tool that's interactive that you can type in or write on to help keep track of where we are in transition, who are my points of contact, and kind of really getting that plan on paper. Some resources specific for Denver would be the School of Choice process that is available for ECE or early childhood, which starts at the age of 3. Their choice and enrollment website has a video that explains that process and a ton of resources. At RMHS, we have created an EI transition guide that includes much of the information that I discussed today in terms of detailed description of the transition process and how, as a family, to be really active participants and be involved during that process. And then RMHS also has a transition resource list that is available through service coordinators, and they would be the best person to connect with so that you can get the most up-to-date information on what resources information we have available for after 3 in those categories of like schooling and funding and therapy options. Thank you for your time this evening.
So does anyone have any questions right now about this EI transition? Any questions for Shannon? Anything that was brought up that you just want a little more clarification? Oh.
I was curious, what are the types of funding folks typically are trying to request during that transition?
That's a great question, Kirsten. Families who participate in early intervention at RMHS do things sometimes like swim lessons or music classes, and that's something that we can look to continue for that transition period. If a family is looking for like backpacks or things that they will need to like go to school, or even things that they might need to have in the home to help with like regulation, that has been successful during early intervention that we would want to have in place before a child leaves the program.
Is that different than like the CES waiver?
It would be different, and Julianne will get into the waivers a little bit. Children that are in early intervention who aren't on the CES waiver would be more making those requests, because it would be something that a family needs that isn't provided by another program or a waiver that they are receiving support from.
Okay, and then I have another question.
Mhm.
Is preschool, is it typical for a child that's come out of early intervention to have an IEP in a Denver public school preschool?
Yes, I would say many of our children who are still showing delays close to their third birthday and go through the evaluation process will be found eligible and can have an IEP developed through Denver Public Schools to receive services in the preschool setting.
And that would happen before they actually get started at preschool, or does it happen after?
That's a great question. So part of the big part of that transition conference around 2.5 is to involve the school district so that they can schedule the evaluation and IEP meeting to occur before the third birthday, because ideally that plan would be established and developed prior to the third birthday so that services could pick up and take over right when early intervention ends. Sometimes with availability for evaluation, scheduling, or timing in terms of the school year, like over the summer when school's not in session, that may impact it. But the goal is to have everything set up and in place, school-based and for the family at home before the third birthday hits, so that we don't experience any type of cliff in terms of not having support when early intervention ends on the third birthday.
Cool, thank you.
Yes, of course. And my contact information will be later in the slide. So if anybody has any questions or any personal things that they want to discuss, and not in this format for a child that might be in early intervention and approaching transition, you are able to reach out and I'm happy to connect with you.
Okay. We good? Any last questions? So I'm going to move on now to discuss the children's programs. The roadmap to success that you can see on the slide illustrates the path of services available to children and their caregivers at RMHS. So many families in the 3 to 5 age group begin services through early intervention. And so because of this, we have that highlighting as the on-ramp to services, on-ramp to the road to success. However, you don't necessarily have to be in early intervention in order to enroll in RMHS, but we just want to highlight that as the on-ramp. You'll also notice 3 major milestones for children marked on this slide: children entering school, youth preparing for adult services, and lastly, the transition to adulthood. RMHS is available to help families through these milestones by providing case management services throughout. Ages 3 to 5 is highlighted due to this time often being children's first educational milestone, starting school. The Family Support Services Program is beneficial during this time period because case management services can provide guidance, support, and resources to families as they navigate this time period and start building their supports in home in school and in the community. Age 5 is also a milestone because the qualifications for services changes at this time. At age 5, children are required to have a diagnosis of an intellectual developmental disability in order to continue enrollment in family support. Children can enter family support, so the time period between 3 and 5, as long as they have still a delay that's displayed, whether that be developmental, intellectual, they are eligible for services. But at age 5, that changes, and they must have a diagnosis of an intellectual developmental disability. Our case managers can help families through this process, and we encourage families, if they do think that their child would have a potential to qualify, that they do so, because this opens many doors for support that otherwise wouldn't be available. This said, is if a family does leave, they can always re-enroll or apply later. Supports needs may change as youth start preparing for adulthood. Service coordinators begins discussing post-high school goals with the family around 14, and enrolled clients are added to the wait list for the developmental disability waiver. Age 14 is the earliest that individuals can be added to this wait list, and we encourage families to do so because the wait list is quite long. And then towards the end of this roadmap, you'll see young adults 18 to 21. They can continue with services through the active service coordination and the adult programming. And we strongly encourage young adults to enroll in RMHS prior to exiting school, because so many students lose important supports when school ends. And our Milivy program and waiver programs can help individuals build a network of supports, and our enrollment team and service coordinators will help guide them through that process. So it's kind of similar to the EI process that Shannon discussed. We start talking to families at about 17 and a half, and then at 17.9, we refer them, the individuals, to our enrollment team, who will start talking about adult programs. So this slide provides a highlight, or is a highlight, of what our children's program looks like. We have at the top children's program, and then the 5 programs that are under that: family support, and then the 4 waivers that we manage for children: CES, CHIRP, CLLI, and the CHCBS waiver. So I'm going to start by just quickly going over what family support is and the eligibility requirements. So family support is designed for children and youth and provides individualized supports and services to families who are caring for a child in their home with a developmental delay or disability. Family support provides case management as well as resource and funding support that's related to the child's diagnosis and needs that are above and beyond typical costs related to child rearing. The child and family must live in the city and county of Denver to be enrolled. So the benefits to being enrolled in the family support program include navigation, support, resources, funding, and the ongoing assistance of a dedicated service coordinator throughout a child's lifespan, throughout their growing up. Service coordinators aid families with navigating the school system and providing community supports and information about Medicaid and Medicaid waivers. Navigating community supports and resources can be really challenging for families. So family support coordinators have extensive resource lists that can help connect them to various providers and other activities and services in the community. Our service coordinators communicate routinely throughout the year, and once a year they will hold a formal plan meeting with the caregivers and discuss successes, goals, and things that the family and the child might work on for the coming year. The focus of family support is on the entire family, and our service coordinators are here to provide resources and funding so that families are supported in the best ways possible. Types of funding that are available include respite so that caregivers can take a break from caregiving, funding for professional services and therapies that might not be covered by insurance, as well as medical expenses that might not be covered, and assistive technology. So now I want to focus on the 4 Medicaid waivers that our children's program manages. These waivers are home and community-based services waivers, also known as HCBS waivers. So I feel like a lot of people have heard of CES. So what the CES waiver is, it's designed for children with an intellectual developmental disability. The children must be enrolled in a community-centered board such as RMHS first. And the referrals for CES will come from the family support service coordinator. The age range from this program is birth through 17. And it's designed for children who have intense medical needs or behavior conditions that require 24-hour care or supervision. And this includes during the night. Children receiving CES services must require line of sight supervision and can never be left alone due to health or safety reasons. The Children's Residential Habilitation Program waiver, or also known as CHIRP, provides services for children and youth who have an intellectual or developmental disability and very high needs. Their needs for support put them at risk of or in need of out-of-home placement. These waiver services provided through CHIRP help the children or youth learn to maintain the skills needed to live in their communities. The referrals for this program or this waiver must also come from the community-centered board. The family service coordinator can provide more information and also submit the referral to that program. We also manage 2 home and community-based services waivers for children. That is the children with life-limiting illness and the children's home and community-based services waiver. The CLLI waiver is designed for youth from birth through age 18. And this program provides medical benefits in the home for children with a life-limiting illness. Children found eligible for this waiver must meet the Social Security Administration's definition of disability, meaning that they're not able to participate in any gainful activity due to their medical or mental disability. And then the Children's Home and Community-Based Services waiver is designed to support children and youth from birth through age 17. This waiver is available for children with significant medical needs and who are at risk for institutional care in an acute hospital or a skilled nursing facility. Children on this waiver must also meet the SSA disability definition. Now, children on the CLLI and the CHCBS waivers may qualify for additional support through Family Support or Mill-Levy Naughton program. And I'll briefly go over what that is. So they can qualify for family support if they also have an intellectual developmental disability. Neither Family Support or Mill-Levy Naughton program are waiver services, so children can be enrolled in both programs at the same time. So Mill-Levy Naughton program. As I said, it's a separate program from the children's. This program may be a good fit for families who have an identified immediate funding need, but they don't want the ongoing support of family support case management. They might be really busy. They have a lot of other services going on. They can't meet the requirements for family support, but they do have immediate funding need. So that might be continuing with swimming lessons or other activities, or they just things like that, but they don't want case management per se. So the referrals for this program can be made from the Family Support Service Coordinator, can be made from early intervention. We also accept referrals from external requests by a parent, a caregiver, or a service provider. As with other programs, the criteria for this is the same. So individuals are eligible from birth through age 4 if they have a documented developmental delay. And then after 5, they must have a diagnosis of an intellectual developmental disability. Families must also live in Denver. And this is because of the funding support that we receive from Denver County. So any questions about what I brought up? I do kind of want to touch on what the eligibility requirements are a bit. That wasn't on the slide, but I know it's important for families to know this, in case they're wondering, well, my child is in EI, we're interested in family support, but what happens at 5? What are those eligibility requirements? So I'll touch on that real quick and then answer any questions. So as I mentioned, as long as a child has a documented developmental delay, they're eligible for family support until the age of 5. Our service coordinators will be having these conversations with family probably beginning about 6 months before the 5th birthday, just reminding about this change, all of that stuff. It's also mentioned at each annual meeting. So the family should be aware of this change. And hopefully it doesn't sneak up on them, ideally. So how does an individual qualify for services at RMHS or another community-centered board in Colorado? The individual must have a neurological or neurocognitive disability or diagnosis. So that would be something like autism, potentially cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, Fragile X, certain seizure disorders. So a neurocognitive disability that would impact the individual's impact them and could cause an intellectual developmental disability. So that's part of it. The other part we would need documentation of an assessment for adaptive skills or cognitive skills with a score of 70 or below. How do you get these assessments? Oftentimes, these assessments are done for children through the IEP process. Not necessarily when they're really young, but it definitely does happen in elementary school, middle school, and high school. Generally on every 3 years when the IEP comes up for review. So they do provide the adaptive skills testing, which is generally, we see the Vineland, that's one that's accepted by the state, as well as the ABAS. So those are adaptive tests. Scores must be 70 or below. We would, let's say that kid, adaptive skills are pretty good. They wouldn't qualify, but they could qualify if their IQ or their cognitive skills are lower, 70 or below. That's also done through schools, oftentimes through the IEP process. So if the child has the neurological diagnosis and testing in one of those categories, 70 or below, they could qualify. If a child does not have a neurological diagnosis, they still could qualify, but we would need assessments in both those categories, as well, generally speaking, a full diagnostic evaluation that states because of these scores, we would determine that this child has an intellectual developmental disability. So we would need documentation from both. There are outside agencies that also perform these assessments. So that's an option. Medicaid will pay for these tests, and some insurance will as well. And we can provide resources for those. So that's what was required at age 5 or older. Any questions about that?
Yes.
Okay.
To clarify, what if you have the adaptive score below 70, but not the cognitive, and you have that diagnosis?
They would qualify. So we will only need one assessment. We often see it. We often actually recommend that if a family thinks that If the adaptive scores are 70 or below, we just go with that. IQ testing, cognitive testing is a lot more intense. It's challenging for kids. It's long testing, but an adaptive, the Vineland is something that the parents would fill out. Sometimes we also see school professionals complete those as well. So we get a picture of what the teacher or a therapist might see, and a parent. But we would only need one of those tests with 70 or below. If they don't have the neurological diagnosis, then we would need both. But it's just not necessary if there is that neurocognitive diagnosis.
I said thank you, but I was muted.
And these tests are very expensive. So I think it's also important for families to know that if you start the intake process with us and learn that you need more assessments, and your insurance won't cover it, you can request funding assistance. So as long as you're seeking eligibility, you can request mill levy funding so that you could pay for these tests. They could be up to $2,000 or more. So if insurance covers it, that's wonderful. That's why we also recommend seeking out schools help with that through the IEP. I would say a good majority of the assessments I see do come from school. So that's a win-win. You know, we would just need to make sure that the assessments are signed by the school professionals. Okay. Anything else? All right.
Just one more quick question about that.
Sure. Yeah.
My background was working in a private school, so we didn't have a lot of these services for our children.
Mhm.
And I wondered if like an out of district, like would that, if someone moved to Denver County with say a 5-year-old, you know, and they had already gone through the documentation in a different district, would you guys want to have DPS like redo it?
No, that is not required. That's a great question. We will accept IEPs from other places if they have those assessments done. That works.
Okay.
Also, I think it's really important to know as well, if families have are enrolled in another community-centered board in Colorado, they can just be transferred to us. The family doesn't need to do anything. They're just let them know that you moved. You're now living in Denver County. And the community-centered board, the formal one, will initiate that transfer to Rocky Mountain Human Services. So once an individual is found eligible for IDD in the state of Colorado, they're eligible for life throughout the state. So you can move from CCB to CCB and not have to go through that whole process again, which is great news for a lot of people, I think. We don't recognize from another state necessarily. So you would have to go through that process if you came from Kansas or Florida. Okay. All right. So how do we get there? How do families start building a village of support that paves the way for their child's success? So step one, if you are not yet enrolled, would involve completing a referral form. And this can be found on our website at rmhs.com. These referrals may be made by an individual, if they're 18 years or older, or a family member, a friend, service provider, or even a teacher. The referral will help guide us in ensuring that you are connected by the intake program that best meets your needs, whether that be long-term care for significant medical needs or the IDD side. Step two is the completion and submission of the request for determination of developmental disability. So this form is your ticket to intake and will start the enrollment process. Once you submit the referral, someone contacts you, they'll provide you with an intake packet. However, you could also reach out to me if you're interested and know that you want to apply for family support, and I can provide you with the intake packet as well. And step 3 is the intake and enrollment process. So during intake, you will be provided options counseling. So this intake and enrollment begins as soon as the intake department receives your request for determination of developmental disability. So that's the application that will start a process of intake. So your coordinator will counsel with you and discuss your child's and family's needs. They'll share information about the program options, and then you'll learn about the eligibility requirements for programming. If additional information is needed, such as assessments and/or medical records, they can help walk you through this process, and they can also help you obtain medical records or school documents. Your completed request for determination will be reviewed, and then a determination of eligibility will be made. If your child is found eligible, a referral to the program that you're interested in or that best meets your needs will be made, and then you'll be assigned a service coordinator who will contact you for a formal meeting. And this is when you'll develop a support plan for the coming year. So if you have any questions at any time, anything comes up, please contact me or even the intake department. I'm probably easier to reach, to be honest. So feel free to give me a call, shoot me an email, and I'm happy to discuss specific needs or questions you might have regarding your child or loved one. So I want to quickly recap what was covered. So RMHS programs provide services to individuals from birth to the end of life. Children from birth through age 4 with a current developmental delay may qualify for services. And children and adults age 5 and older must have a diagnosis of an intellectual developmental disability in order to receive services through family support or one of the other waiver programs. RMHS provides case management services for a variety of programs, including early intervention, family support, Mill-Levy non-program, and home and community-based services waivers. And some of our waivers require a diagnosis of an intellectual developmental disability. Enrollment in RMHS provides you with case management support as well as assistance with resources and funding. So if you have any questions or need assistance, my contact information is listed below. I'm the school and community liaison. I also have a small children's Mill-Levy caseload that I manage. Shannon Banks, our amazing early intervention specialist. And then there's also contact information for our intake department. Thank you. So I will work on trying to figure out how to stop sharing. I don't know. How do I do that?
I think I could do it for you if you would like me to.
I would just not as familiar with.
You like me to?
Here we go.
Your screen. Okay.
Your screen share. Stop share. There we go. Woo.
Well, you're a Zoom pro now.
Thank you so much. And I completely relate to the screen sharing and all of that with other formats and platforms. And yeah, so thank you. And it was wonderful information. And I personally learned a lot, which is great because folks are calling me at the autism community store and I feel like a little more versed for them, and I can of course give them this video as well. And thanks to our folks who jumped on the call tonight who are still with us. I hope it was helpful for you, and feel free to call the store. We can get you all this information if you missed anything, and hook you up with RMHS. And I just want to thank RMHS. Like, we have folks that come in regularly to like my support groups and talk about the services that they're getting hooked into, and or left RMHS and are kind of bummed out about it.
Mhm.
So I just do appreciate everything you're doing for our youth and our adults with disabilities in the Denver area.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, families should know they could come back anytime. If they were enrolled, their child is eligible, come back. The process for reapplying will be simple. Families still need to fill out that request for determination form. But hopefully, I mean, we'll have all the records. It'll be a quicker process. And we can even potentially connect you to the same service coordinator if they're still around, which is nice too.
Oh yeah. Well, we'll definitely encourage folks who may have dropped off to, if they want services, to come back. Well, thank you very much.
Yes.
If anybody has any other questions, you can give us a call at the Autism Community Store.
Awesome. And feel free to share my contact information with anyone.
Absolutely will.
Kirsten.
Same here.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Have a good night.
Bye all.